Have you ever seen a person remain faithful for decades, just to finally rise up and utter, "Enough is enough"? That's precisely what millions of fans of Sister Wives saw when Meri Brown, after years of emotional abandonment, finally spoke the most iconic line in the history of the show. "We are never, ever, ever getting back together." And no, this was not Taylor Swift. This was real life, raw emotion, and the collapse of a marriage that had been stretched thin for over 30 years. In this story, we're going to walk together through the rise, the cracks, the heartbreak, and the explosive finale of Meri and Kody's relationship. But don't think this is just a recap. Oh no. What we're uncovering is the hidden pain, the silent sacrifices, and the exact moment when the curtain fell on polygamy's most fragile thread. If you've ever asked yourself why Meri stayed so long, or what finally pushed her to slam the door shut, stay with me, because once you witness the chain of events, from loneliness, to betrayal, to that final defiant moment, you'll see why this showdown was not just a breakup. It was history in the making. So buckle up, because this is not the sister wives you thought you knew. This is the Meri Brown tale. The tale of a woman who loved, persevered, and then simply said, "Never again." Every great tale starts with hope, and Meri Brown's tale started with a vow she believed would endure. When Sister Wives first emerged on TV in 2010, Meri Brown wasn't just one of Kody's wives, she was the wife, the original, the legal spouse, the woman who thought that by becoming polygamous, she was coming into a holy union that would bring her family into eternity. To many viewers, particularly those watching for the very first season, Meri appeared to be strong, stable, and ready to share her husband for the love of her religion. She smiled for the cameras, she gushed about the lifestyle, and she set the scene for a woman who was content in her decision. But let's step back. Behind those smiles was a tale that even the cameras didn't entirely tell. You see, when Meri wed Kody in 1990, she was not opting into a TV experiment. She was a devout young woman, firmly believing that plural marriage was the ultimate in devotion. It wasn't about Kody to her. It was about God, obedience, and the eternal family her religion promised. She believed wholeheartedly that in this life, there would be joy, spiritual reward, and companionship. But even in those initial years, fissures developed. Meri was Kody's sole legal wife for over 2 decades. Yet she wasn't his sole emotional partner. Within months of their marriage, Janelle and Christine joined the mix. Though Meri had braced herself for difficulties, after all, polygamy isn't easy, she hadn't envisioned how rapidly her sense of belonging would start to erode. For anyone who has been following the series, you're well aware of how many times Meri is referred to as the lonely wife. That wasn't a random label. Right from the start, she had only one child with Kody, her daughter Mariah. And while all the other wives continued to have large families, Meri's remained small. The house was full of children. Christine had 6, Janelle had 6, Robin would later add 5, and yet Meri's corner always felt quiet. For some women, that silence is a blessing. For Meri, it was a wound she carried quietly. On camera, she blessed the dream of one big happy family. Behind the scenes, she was struggling with the silent question, if family is the most important thing, why do I feel so isolated within mine? This is where Meri's story becomes so agonizingly familiar to audiences. So many women, particularly women of her generation, understand what it is to remain loyal to something due to faith, obligation, or habit, even if that commitment does no longer make one happy. Meri wasn't only struggling for her marriage, she was struggling for her sense of self. She had constructed her whole life upon the assumption that being the first wife would equate to security, respect, and love. But eventually that promise started to feel like a prison. Season after season, the fans began to notice. They noticed how frequently Meri was excluded from the conversation. They saw the times when Kody hardly glanced at her. They sensed between the lines in her interviews, where her smile was just a little too perfect. And slowly the viewers came to understand what Meri likely already did in her heart. Her place in the family was diminishing. But this is the thing, Meri didn't go. Not at first, not even when the quiet was deafening, and the isolation was more than she could stand. She remained. She persevered, because that's what the first wife does. She bears the burden, she keeps the vow, she stays the icon of fidelity, even when the ground is disintegrating under her. And that's why her eventual showdown with Kody was so powerful. It wasn't just a wife walking away. It was the breaking of a 30-year promise. But what happens when loyalty turns into a cage, and the key is in someone else's hands? On the surface, the Browns sold us harmony. But behind the smiles, Meri's silence was telling a different story. When Sister Wives debuted, TLC marketed the Brown family as a radical romance and religious experiment. Audiences were first introduced to Kody, his three wives then, Meri, Janelle, and Christine, and eventually the young and energetic Robin. The show relied heavily on the notion that this was a non-traditional family in so many ways, defying the notion of polygamy as something serious and no-holds-barred in terms of work and domination. And for a time, folks believed that dream. The family nights appeared happy, the children were rambunctious, and the wives talked of sisterhood with practiced charm. Polygamy was being marketed not as pandemonium, but as community. And during those early years, the Browns appeared to be succeeding on their bet. America was tuning in, talking about, and in many instances, even respecting their skill at making it work. But if you glanced hard enough, there was one face in the background that seldom lit up quite as bright. Meri. She was the legal wife, the matriarchal figure, but somehow appeared oddly set aside in her own narrative. While Christine joked, Janelle handled the budget, and Robin later introduced new vitality, Meri grew quieter and quieter. It wasn't just editing. Fans picked up on it, and they discussed it. On Facebook groups and forums, individuals started questioning, why is Meri always so sad? Why does Kody hardly sit with her? Why does she disappear in group discussions? The reality was that although the family proclaimed polygamy as being together, Meri felt otherwise. Her lone child, Mariah, was becoming an adult, and soon to fly the coop, leaving Meri with even greater vacancy. And with Kody dividing his attention among 3 other homes, Meri too often stood at the periphery of family functions, there but not exactly part of it. For Meri, this wasn't what she had envisioned as her dream. She had assumed that polygamy would translate into boundless love, multiplied help, and camaraderie on all sides. What it formed instead was a system in which love was apportioned, attention doled out, and her own needs frequently neglected. And that's where the polygamy fantasy actually starts to crack. Theoretically, it promised more. Practically, it tended to deliver less closeness, less attention, less importance attached to the woman who had been present at the beginning. This is why audiences from all over the world, particularly women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, found themselves empathizing with Meri. They saw their own struggles reflected in her silence. The faithful wife who just keeps coming. The one who gives up on her own happiness for the greater good. The one who is told to smile and grit through even when her heart is shattering. And still, she remained. She clung, not only because of her belief, but because of hope. Hope that things would improve. Hope that Kody would turn back to her. Hope that one day the sisterhood she had been promised would in fact include her. But instead of healing, the cracks widened. As seasons went by, Kody became more distracted. Christine grew increasingly vocal. Janelle focused on her independence. And then, a new player entered the family dynamic. A woman who would shift the entire balance and push Meri further into the shadows. Her name was Robin. And with her arrival, the so-called dream of polygamy would turn into Meri's greatest nightmare. Because when Kody brought Robin in, he wasn't merely gaining another wife. He was redefining the rules of love in a way Meri could never compete. Nevertheless, a turning point comes for every family, and for the Browns, that point had a name. When Robin Sullivan entered Kody Brown's world in 2010, the cameras captured a man nearly radiant with enthusiasm. Kody was more energetic, his smile broader, his laugh boisterous. To fans, it was obvious, this was not another wife added to the household. This was the start of a seismic change in power dynamics within the Brown home. Initially, Meri appeared to be a good sport. She brought Robin home to meet Kody. She professed admiration for the potential of bringing in a 4th wife. On the surface, it appeared that Meri was offering the hand of friendship and living the plural marriage principle. But behind closed doors, a whole other story was being played out. Meri had always thought that polygamy was sharing time, sharing responsibilities, sharing a husband's love. But with Robin, it wasn't sharing. It was losing. Suddenly and overnight, Kody's focus turned heavily toward Robin. He was goofy with her in a way he hadn't been with Meri, Janelle or Christine in years. And the family saw it. Christine confessed that she felt jealous. Janelle subtly pulled away. But for Meri, the pain was deeper. She was the first wife, the one who had walked through decades of sacrifice with Kody's hand in hers. The one who had stood by him through thick and thin. And now she was seeing a younger, more vibrant woman take the spotlight as the focus of his life. Robin's arrival wasn't just a change in Kody's affections. It was a change in family dynamics. Robin brought her own kids with her from a previous marriage, and Kody insisted on showing them up as his father. He welcomed Robin's children with open arms, but Meri couldn't help but notice the comparison to herself. She only had one daughter with Kody, and for years she had battled infertility. Now, as she watched him give his all to Robin's children, she had to ask herself, why didn't he care about me that much? About us. The show positioned Robin as the peacemaker, the new wife who was sweet and calmed things down. But many viewers recognized something else. A woman who became the favorite of Kody's, whether anyone liked it or not. And favoritism is toxic in polygamy. Once the scales tip, the whole thing starts to crumble. For Meri, the cracks opened up into gaping holes. She began to retreat. She smiled less on television. She talked less on group interviews. And when she did talk, her words were sharply laced. The venom of someone who knew she was being left behind, but did not want to verbalize it. This is where most viewers started to see the pain of Meri more clearly. They saw her smaller-than-life presence dwindle. They saw the space increasing between her and Kody. They saw her isolation intensify to a deeper level. A feeling of being invisible. And invisibility is a deadly thing in a marriage. Because when you are no longer felt seen, you begin to wonder about your worth. And when you begin wondering about your worth, you begin seeking validation elsewhere. That's precisely what would befall Meri in the years to come. Her isolation would drive her into one of the most degrading scandals of the entire show, an internet romance that would erupt into headlines, destroy her faith in Kody, and lastly brand her as the wife who got catfished. But all before that scandal occurred, Meri would have to suffer years of being on the outside looking in, observing Robin's relationship with Kody strengthen, observing her place in the family fall away, observing her visions of polygamy become a daily reminder of what she lacked. Because when Robin joined, Meri didn't merely acquire a new sister wife, she lost her status as Kody's wife. And from that point on, her marriage would never be the same. Oftentimes the loudest silence is the one reverberating within a crowded place. Life within the Brown family appeared hectic, raucous and plentiful from the outside. Dozens of children playing, wives preparing meals, family gatherings at long tables. It was the definition of abundance. Yet to Meri, that noise only amplified the ring of loneliness. She wasn't missing people. She was missing connection. Think about being in a home where everyone is speaking but nobody's listening to you. That was life for Meri. She had one daughter, Mariah, who was growing up quickly and getting ready to establish her own life. And although Meri loved her daughter, the reality was straightforward. When Mariah left, Meri would be alone in a way the other wives were not. Christine had a house full of kids. Janelle had her own bustling household. Robin by then had Kody's full devotion and attention. But Meri's home felt like an empty echo chamber. And here's the painful part. The cameras caught it. Viewers noticed Meri sitting quietly in the background during family dinners. They saw her glance toward Kody, only to be met with disinterest or avoidance. They noticed how she would attempt to jump into conversations, only to have her contributions sound hollow. Fans discussed it constantly online. Why is Meri always in the background? Why does she look so lost? Why does Kody treat her as though she is invisible? For many women watching, this was where the show stopped being reality TV and started hitting home. Meri's struggle wasn't just about polygamy, it was about feeling unseen in your own marriage. A pain countless women understand all too well. She had given decades of her life to this relationship, poured herself into the family, and yet somehow ended up feeling like a stranger in her own home. This increasing isolation began to catch up with her. Her previously vibrant personality lost some of its luster. Her smiles grew a little more forced. And off-camera, Meri confided that she didn't feel like she was connected even to Kody or the family anymore. The so-called sisterhood wasn't covering it. If anything, they made things worse. Rather than comfort, she felt judged or belittled by the other wives. By now, Kody's favoritism of Robyn was a public fact. He spent more time at her place, showered her children with attention, and invested emotional capital into her that Meri could only hope to get. And for Meri, seeing this happen wasn't only hurtful, it was humiliating. And humiliation, when not spoken of, tends to develop into desperation. Because when a person feels invisible, they start looking for someone, anyone, who will see them, someone who will listen, someone who will remind them they matter. And that's exactly where Meri's story was about to take a turn that shocked both her family and the millions of fans who had been quietly rooting for her. Her isolation was the doorway to something she could have never envisioned. An internet relationship that held out hope of connection, attention, and validation. To Meri, it seemed like a lifeline. To everyone else, it would become the scandal that summed her up. For sometimes when the silence becomes too heavy to bear, the first voice that brings comfort is impossible to avoid. Even if it happens to be a lie. Maybe the quest for love does not bring you to a new beginning. It brings you directly into a trap. By the time the catfish scandal made headlines, fans of Sister Wives weren't entirely surprised. They had been watching Meri's slow unraveling for years. She was lonely, isolated, and desperate for attention. The marriage she once believed would last for eternity had crumbled into awkward silences and cold distance. So when she began an online relationship in 2015, many viewers understood why. This wasn't an innocent distraction to Meri. This felt like hope. The individual sending the messages referred to himself as Sam Cooper, a successful suave businessman who appeared to be hanging on her every word. All these years of being ignored by Kody, and now suddenly she was being noticed. Somebody was looking at her, inquiring about her, admiring her, making her feel alive once more. But here's the catch. Sam Cooper never existed. The owner of the profile was really a woman named Jackie Overton, who had started a fake identity to entrap Meri. What began as an escape from solitude turned out to be one of the most embarrassing pages of her life. When the truth finally came out, it struck Meri like a hurricane. Not only had she been lied to, but the specifics spilled into the public domain. Private voicemails, screenshotted messages, even tearful confessions were splashed on the internet. And since Sister Wives was a TV show, Meri could not hide behind stoic silence. The cameras recorded her anguish, her shame, and her strained efforts to justify herself to a husband who had already ceased regarding her as an equal. To fans, this was a moment of reckoning. Some felt for her deeply, noting that Meri had been emotionally abandoned far earlier than she ever turned to the internet. Others derided her bitterly, calling her an adulterous betrayer and embarrassing the family. But either way, the tale went viral. For once, Meri wasn't simply the quiet, relegated wife. She was the drama queen. And what of Kody? His response was frigid, bordering on disdainful. Rather than express sympathy, he appeared to view the scandal as confirmation that Meri had let him down, sidestepping the years of abandonment that had driven her there. It was a bitter irony. Meri had long been invisible, and now, in the most terrible way imaginable, she was more visible than ever. For most, this was when sympathy for Kody started to crumble. They witnessed a woman who had dedicated decades of her life to a man who couldn't be bothered with a shred of empathy when she needed it most. They witnessed the double standard of a husband who expected fidelity from more than one wife, but offered almost no loyalty in return. And again, they saw Meri bearing the burden of shame on her shoulders, as Kody walked away. But the thing about rock bottom is this: it will either shatter you, or it will be the point where you begin your ascent back up. For Meri, the catfish thing was both. It shattered her spirit, leaving her battered and vulnerable. But it also had the effect of confronting her with the truth she had been denying for all these years. Her marriage to Kody wasn't just failing, it was a loss in every way that counted. Nevertheless, walking away never is easy, particularly when religion, relatives, and years of shared history are at stake with your name. So Meri did what she always did. She remained, she persevered, and she attempted to rebuild out of the ashes of an affair that everyone was gossiping about. But the reality is, once trust breaks, it can never be like before. And Meri was to soon discover just how cold Kody's heart can be. Some marriages don't fizzle out with a bang, but with silence so suffocating it's like a tomb. Since the catfish drama, Meri and Kody's relationship wasn't strained so much as shattered. They uttered the words, "We'll try," but you could see it in their eyes. The connection was lost. Whatever had held them together in those first few years of laughter, early love, and vows of forever had disintegrated into strained small talk and cold distance. Audiences remember seeing those moments. Meri sitting on the couch opposite Kody, attempting to break down the ways she'd felt unseen. Kody agreeing with a crossed arm and flat tone. It wasn't the talk of a couple seeking to mend. It was the talk of two humans who'd already lost, but not yet said it aloud. And here's where Meri's pain became something millions of women recognized. She was still showing up, still calling herself Kody's wife, still trying to fit into the family. But emotionally she was already living alone. Many women watching, especially those in their 40s and 50s, saw themselves in her staying in relationships long past their expiration date, clinging to vows, tradition, or simply the fear of starting over. To Kody, the catfish scandal was his out in taking a mental checkout for good. He would make statements such as, "I don't feel safe with Meri," or "There's no spark anymore." Yet if you truly listened, it wasn't regarding the scandal, it was due to years of neglect, favoritism, and his increased fixation on Robyn. The scandal was merely the easy scapegoat. Meanwhile, Meri's position in the family kept shrinking. She wasn't included in big decisions. She wasn't part of the inside jokes. Even her presence in group scenes felt obligatory. Like the producers needed her on camera, but the family didn't really want her there. And Meri noticed, she admitted in interviews, that she felt like a leftover, someone who was technically part of the family but no longer truly belonging. This time was difficult for the fans to endure. They had previously dared to hope that Meri could rebuild, or that Kody would mellow. Instead, each new season presented them with two people slowly growing further apart, stuck in a marriage that existed only on paper. And the saddest part, Meri was the only one who appeared to be trying to keep it together. And even those efforts were half-hearted, like she recognized in advance it was doomed. In a lot of ways, this was the most brutal chapter of all, because it's one thing for a marriage to terminate abruptly, in rage or betrayal. It's another for it to die gradually, day by day, until all that's left is two people moving on autopilot. And that's what happened to Meri and Kody. Year after year, they existed in that suspended state. No divorce documents. No open announcement of separation. Only the unspoken understanding, voiced between the lines, that the marriage had already ended. It was a ghost marriage, present, but dead. And fans could sense it. They swamped social media with queries. Why does Meri remain? Why won't she go away? Doesn't she deserve better than this? Some attacked her for holding on to Kody, while others supported her, reminding us that departing from a 30-year-old marriage isn't easy, particularly in a family based on faith and public opinion. But one thing was certain. Meri's tale wasn't over. Because if you live in limbo long enough, something sooner or later causes you to make a decision. And for Meri, that decision was approaching faster than anyone had anticipated. Because you can only live in a ghost marriage so long before the cracks finally spread wide enough to shatter. Each polygamous union vows equality. But in the Brown clan, equality existed only in theory. As soon as Robyn became a part of the family, rumors of favoritism started. Fans picked up on it. The wives did too. And Kody didn't even bother to camouflage it. With time, those rumors swelled into irrefutable proof. Robyn was not another wife. She was the wife. It began subtly. Kody would light up when Robyn walked into the room. He spent more nights at her house than at anyone else's. He stood up for her aggressively in fights, often at the expense of the other wives. But over the years, the preferential treatment ceased to be subtle. It became glaring, nearly painful to observe. For Christine, it was draining. For Janelle, it was infuriating. But for Meri, it was heartbreaking. Because she wasn't merely fighting for affection, she was seeing Kody bestow on Robyn the type of affection and energy she had pleaded for throughout decades. It wasn't that Meri desired to be Kody's sole love. She had embraced polygamy. She had embraced sharing. What she couldn't tolerate was being rejected, treated as a leftover, while Robyn got to bask in the fruits of marriage. And here's the truth. Favoritism kills polygamy. The whole system only functions if all the wives feel valued and respected. The minute one wife is identified as the favorite, the system falls apart. And that's exactly what occurred to the Browns. Fans online started referring to Robyn as the queen wife, noting how Kody was living at her residence while hardly ever going to the others. They analyzed his body language. Leaning forward toward Robyn, smiling at Robyn, laying a hand on her arm. Something he hadn't done for Meri, Christine, or Janelle in years. Social media was abuzz with posts such as, "Why does he not just confess Robyn is his sole wife?" And this is not plural marriage anymore. This is monogamy with added drama. For Meri, each instant of favoritism was another reminder of what she had lost. She once possessed the legal status. She once had the intimacy, now she was the outsider in a family that she helped create. Even Robyn's children were given more attention and care by Kody than her own daughter ever received. That type of comparison is brutal. It erodes your confidence until all that remains is doubt. And here's where many people were screaming at the screen. "Meri, leave him. He doesn't deserve you." They weren't mistaken, but it isn't easy to leave. Decades of belief, family bonds, emotional history can't just be erased. Meri had put her life into this man, into this family, into this fantasy. Leaving would mean she'd been living a lie all this time. But even with all the weight bearing down on her, the favoritism became too much to ignore. Kody wasn't just drifting towards Robyn. He was openly constructing a future with her while abandoning the others. And Meri, yet again, was hanging in the background, wondering how she'd progressed from first wife to second-class wife. But favoritism has a penchant for starting a fire in those excluded. Christine was already starting to wonder where she fit in within the family. Janelle was subtly forging her own way. And Meri, while still trapped, was beginning to sense the pressure that would ultimately push her to the truth. Because once favoritism is this blatant, the wives are left with an option: continue to pretend it's a marriage, or finally leave. Sometimes it takes one loud voice to speak out what everybody else has been feeling in secret. For years, Christine had been playing her part in the family. She was the bubbly one, the homemaker, the wife who kept the atmosphere light even when tensions rose high. Behind that smiling exterior, though, Christine was drowning slowly. She had been dropping little hints about her unhappiness for seasons. Little truths that the fans caught. Kody didn't respect her. He didn't care about her kids. He didn't respect her. And then, in 2021, Christine finally did what so many fans had been asking Meri to do for years. She walked away. Her announcement stunned the family, but charged the audience. Fans overwhelmed social media with cheers, addressing her as a hero, a role model, an inspiration of courage. For the first time, a member of the Brown family had opted for self-respect over sacrifice. Christine wasn't merely departing Kody. She was denying the whole facade of equality and polygamy. And here's why it was so important. Christine voiced everything the other wives had silently endured. She spoke aloud that favoritism had killed the marriage. She confessed she'd felt ignored and unwanted. She proved it was possible to escape a man who'd led his wives to believe they were nothing without him. For Meri, watching Christine leave was complicated. On one hand, she admired Christine's bravery. On the other, it forced her to face her own situation more clearly than ever. If Christine could find the strength to walk away, why couldn't she? If Christine's kids could support her decision, why couldn't Meri's daughter? If Christine could build a new life, why was Meri still clinging to a ghost marriage? This was the pivot point not only for Christine, but for the entire family. Janelle started expressing her frustrations more openly. Fans started speculating who would be the next to leave. And Kody, he snapped. He blamed Christine for betrayal, for breaking up the family, for quitting. But the reality was etched on his face. He was mad because Christine had reclaimed her power, something that he could no longer control. And this is where the tale comes full circle back to Meri. For while Christine was making her exit out the door, Meri remained in the background, observing it all go down. Fans pleaded with her online. Meri, track Christine. Don't waste another year on him. But Meri wasn't there yet. Not yet. 2 decades of devotion don't magically evaporate overnight, no matter how fractured the marriage is. But Christine's flight laid the foundation. It gave Meri proof that escape was possible, that survival was a possibility, that happiness beyond the family wasn't something she dreamed about but couldn't have. And once planted, a seed is bound to grow. But for the moment, Meri was still in the same place, quiet, on the sidelines and hurting. Her chapter wasn't over, but Christine's dramatic action had turned the earth she stood on. And soon she would be faced with what Christine had already demonstrated. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is to finally leave. Because once that first wife gets away, the others are no longer able to pretend that there's no choice but to stay. Each strong woman has a breaking point. And Janelle finally reached hers. For years, Janelle was the logical wife. She wasn't typically emotional on TV. She didn't compete with Kody for affection like Christine did. And she didn't outwardly display her isolation like Meri did. Janelle held her head down, worked on her 6 kids, and quietly established her independence. Fans admired her because she came off as solid, pragmatic, even tough in the face of Kody's favoritism. But even the toughest women have a limit. And for Janelle, the limit was when she saw her kids take a back seat to Robyn's children. Fans witnessed it unfold in season 17. Kody fixated on obedience throughout the pandemic. He demanded blind compliance to his rules. Rules that conveniently aligned with how Robyn's family was already living. Janelle's older children, particularly Garrison and Gabe, refused to obey. They questioned his authority. They pushed back against his choices. And rather than listen, Kody shut them down. This was the line Janelle would not accept. Because if there was one thing Janelle had always been unequivocal about, it was her dedication to her children. And seeing Kody put Robyn's family above hers was the last straw. The exchange was raw. Janelle confronted Kody like no viewer had ever seen. She told him straight out that he had lost perspective for the family, that his need for control had killed relationships, that his favoritism had poisoned all of it. And for the first time in years, viewers got a glimpse of Janelle's stoic shell-shattering. She wasn't merely frustrated. She was finished. What made this breaking point so intense was that it wasn't romantic. Janelle had years ago resigned herself to the fact that she didn't share a rich romantic love with Kody. Their relationship had been about pragmatism, about raising children and taking care of life. But even there, Kody couldn't succeed. He couldn't be an involved father. He couldn't be an equal partner. And once Janelle realized that in bright, stark terms there was no reason left for her to remain, fans blew their stack on the internet. Most had expected Christine to go. But Janelle, she had always been rock solid, grounded. Seeing her drive away demonstrated that Kody's grip on the family was dissolving quicker than anyone thought possible. Social media exploded with sympathy for Janelle, applauding her for calling out Kody's hypocrisy. And yet, whereas Christine's escape was triumphant, Janelle's breaking point was bittersweet. For Janelle wasn't merely walking away from a husband. She was walking away from the fantasy of a family she had worked so hard to keep intact. For 30 years, she had juggled budgets, grounded the children, and silently tolerated being secondary to Robyn. Now she was conceding it had all been for nothing. And that's when Meri comes back into play. With Christine leaving and Janelle separating, Meri found herself even more alone. Again, she had to confront the question she had been trying to ignore. Why am I still here? The writing was on the wall. The family was in shambles. The wives were departing. Kody was doubling down on Robyn. And Meri was out of excuses to remain. Because once the strongest wife has reached her limit, the message is unmistakable. There's nothing worth fighting for. Each long goodbye becomes a single final word, enough. For over 30 years, Meri Brown stood by Kody's side. She was the first wife, the legal wife. The faithful wife who held on to faith and family, believing it would see her through anything. She suffered heartbreak, isolation, embarrassment, and years of being made to feel a stranger in her own marriage. She persevered through the favoritism, through the catfish affair, through the complicit silences. And finally, even Meri could see the reality. There was nothing left to cling to. When Christine walked out, the Brown family foundation trembled. When Janelle hit her breaking point, the fissures opened. But when Meri finally bid adieu, it was different. Because her narrative was not just about walking out of Kody. It was about becoming herself again. For years, fans had pleaded with her to leave. They recognized her value before she did. They recognized the woman who had sacrificed everything and gotten nothing back. And when the news finally broke in 2023 that Meri and Kody had legally dissolved their marriage, it was like a collective exhale. Not only for Meri, but for anyone who had ever seen her quietly suffer. What made Meri's goodbye so powerful was its quiet strength. She didn't scream. She didn't lash out. She didn't play the victim. Instead, she acknowledged what had been obvious for years. Her marriage to Kody was over. And had been for a long time. And she chose to walk forward, alone but free. And here's the beauty of it. Meri's goodbye wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. She began focusing on her businesses, her friendships, and her own personal growth. She shared glimpses of travel, laughter, and a lighter spirit than fans had seen in years. The woman who once seemed invisible on the couch beside Kody was now shining on her own. For many viewers, this was the most inspiring part of her journey. Because Meri's story wasn't about weakness. It was about resilience. She may have stayed longer than people thought she should. But in the end, she proved that even after decades of pain, it's never too late to choose yourself. And what happened to Kody? Before Meri left, he had one wife remaining. Robin. The ideal of a plural marriage had fallen apart completely. The big happy family that had previously been seen on TLC was now in pieces. And while Kody accused the wives of being disloyal, the viewers saw the reality. It was his favoritism, his abandonment, and his haughtiness that pushed them all away. For Meri, however, that no longer held true. She was no longer defined by the choices of Kody. She was no longer stuck in the position of being the forgotten wife. She was able to write her own story on her own terms. And that's why her last goodbye is so powerful to fans. Because Meri's story is a reminder to anyone who has ever felt invisible, ignored, or underappreciated. Your value isn't calculated by how long you stick around. It's calculated by the moment you just decide you're better than that. So yes, Meri lingered too long. Yes, she suffered too much. But when she finally released, she gave herself. And all who watched the gift of liberty. Because sometimes the most courageous farewell is the one that breathes. I am enough.